Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
I'm good. I'm really tired. How are you, Ryan?
I'm fine. Better than you. I know you've had a long week. Getting up at 4:45 a.m.
In the AM, that's correct. But it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it, but I appreciate you being here tonight. Ready to go.
All right. Well, tonight we have a listener story that we're going to be sharing with you guys. Her name is Tia, and she wrote this beautiful outline for us, so I'm not going to waste too much time before we get started. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we do start reading?
Nope.
Okay. Tia starts out with, early life was hard. I'm the oldest of 3. We were pretty poor, but had a big extended family who gave us support. So as kids, we didn't really know we were poor. When I was around 5, I was molested by a family member. He was about 18 at the time. I remember the first time I was playing strawberry shortcake in my grandma's basement. My uncle's room was down there, and he had a waterbed and a Nintendo. It was in the 80s, and this was the height of awesome. I was not allowed in there without permission, but this person said I could come in and watch him play Mario. I didn't really understand what happened until years later. He had me sit on his lap to show me how to play. I remember his hand on my thigh, and it made me uncomfortable. I remember he kept shifting, so I'd almost fall, and he would grab me between my legs to keep me from falling. After the first few times, he just left his hand there.
That's scary, because that is the age where you don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And like adults can take advantage of you. I'm not a parent, so who am I to say this, but I think kids should be aware of what's not okay to do to them at any age. Like if someone does this to you, it's okay to tell me, but I don't know. I don't know how I'd handle it.
It's an awkward conversation to have with at any age, I would assume. Tia goes on to write, luckily for me, he was not there super often when I'd come over, and usually when he was occupied with my uncles and their friends playing basketball or being in the pool. I did not have a lot more interaction with him, but after this, he made me uncomfortable and would always pat my butt when I saw him. In therapy, I have talked a lot about how I do think there were other times, but my memory of this period is faded by time, age, and trauma. I do remember years later, I was around 11, I think. My uncle was getting married. My uncles and I are only 12 years apart, so we've always been pretty close. And my little sister and I went to his new apartment. This person was there, and he kept trying to get my sister to sit on his lap while he played video games with my oblivious uncle. I remember seeing him grab at her to get near him, and the way he touched her terrified me. So I took her, and we played in the bedroom with the door locked until it was time to leave. My sister was obsessed with horses, and I was not at all. I didn't want her to cry or leave the room, so I played horses with her for hours. It took me a long time to acknowledge and deal with this, about 30 years. But looking back at all the signs, they were there. I had bedwetting problems till I was 13, and even into my 20s, I'd still crawl into bed and cuddle my mom because nightmares kept me awake. I cried all the time, and I begged not to go to school. I had other issues too. As I mentioned, I come from a huge family. When I was in 4th grade, we ended up moving into my grandparents' house out in the country because my mom had been sick. Here it was my parents, me, my younger brother and sister, my grandparents, 2 uncles, and great-grandma. Wow, that's a lot of people in one home. My one uncle moved out after he got married, but later he and his wife moved in as well. And every summer my aunt came up from Florida with my 4 cousins. My great-grandma lived here as well, so to call it a full house would be an understatement. My whole family is very close and loving, but I always felt excluded. Looking back now, I kind of get it. I had this huge part of myself I was hiding, and that caused me to feel unseen, and I had trauma walls. I was angry. I felt unprotected by these people who were so close and so fiercely protective of each other, and I didn't understand why they didn't see what had happened and helped me. On top of that, I come from a family of absolutely stunning women. My grandma, even then in her 50s, was absolutely gorgeous. Both my aunts and my cousin were skinny and had their hair done and had makeup skills. And my mom, even though I know she doesn't believe it, is to this day one of the most beautiful women I know. I felt chubby and awkward. And my uncle's wife, who lived with us, was constantly obsessed with new diet fads and would joke about how she wished she would just be bulimic. Ooh, not a good thing to joke about. You would know that.
Yeah, that's a rough atmosphere to be in, especially as a kid, being around people who are obsessed with body image and weight and stuff like that. Because then it tells you, as you're in your formative years, this is really important and you should focus on it.
Right. My then 12-year-old mind thought, I can do that. So I developed bulimia. I remember the first time I threw up and how proud of myself I was. And by the time I got to high school, I was living off of caffeine pills and a grapefruit a day. But we'll get to that later. I also began to self-harm. I always did it high enough on my arms so that I could hide it. But it still shocks me that I was able to hide it for as long as I did. Pretty much, I was the poster child for I was molested. I was also weird and withdrawn in a huge family of extroverts and felt constantly judged and excluded. Add this to strict religious beliefs, and I constantly judged myself. I felt unloved and undervalued, and I think all of this led up to me being an easy target.
It's not a good start for this kind of story.
I can't believe the caffeine pills and grapefruit a day. That sounds like such a terrible mix.
Yeah, I remember doing something similar.
With a granola bar?
Yeah, drinking coffee nonstop because, heard that coffee was a stimulant and sped up your metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
So I drank that, and then I would take one of those fiber granola bars and split it into 4 pieces and eat one bite like at 4 different times during the day. And that's all I would eat in a day. Which now I know that was doing more harm than good. Like, I would have been better off fasting than doing that.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, at least my body would have started converting over to ketosis and using my fat. But instead, I was basically starving it by continuing to feed it this sugar and processed food.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't recommend it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like in the moment, you feel like you're doing good.
Yeah.
But you're just like starving.
Oh, yeah. I felt good because I was a teenager. And it's like, when you're young, you can do anything and feel good.
Mm-hmm. You were probably feeling a sense of accomplishment for.
Yeah, I was excited
hitting the
for
goal.
the results that I would see on the scale the next day.
Yeah.
And that was what was keeping me going.
It's like a high. You're running after the high.
Yeah, that led to a very unhealthy time in my life.
Well, Tia goes on to say, sometimes I felt so trapped inside. I started high school in 10th grade because we had moved and I had emotional regulation problems. So I homeschooled for 9th. I also homeschooled for 9th.
I did for 11th.
I did for 9th, and it was the worst year of my life.
It's hard to make that transition.
Yeah, it is. Going back, I remember the first year in very short clips. I remember feeling lost. I didn't know how to make friends. I had a few things that were strongly impacting this. The first is that my school was in a close-knit, mostly Muslim community. I was an outsider. For the most part, they all had siblings and cousins, and this was hard for me because I had spent all of my life feeling rejected by my own siblings and cousins. So it felt like a club everyone but me was invited to. Most of the kids there also spoke second and even third languages. I had a loving envy of this. I will admit it felt like one more act of inclusion I was disqualified from. And then there was the issue of religion. They had their own community they stayed within, and I had mine. It's hard to make friends at school when you're not allowed to see any of them after school. And most of the kids from my own religious community thought I was weird, or their parents thought I was bad association because I dressed in mostly black and was very depressed and withdrawn. And at 15, I was curvy and awkward.
That's rough. I can't imagine being someone who, like, that your peers' parents are labeling you as the person that you shouldn't be with or be around.
I can totally relate to how she's feeling in that way.
Yeah, I remember you kind of being one of those outcast people when we were growing up that the other kids' parents didn't want us.
Yeah, hanging out around.
Yeah.
Hanging around.
It's really damaging to kids.
I liked weird music, and I wore flannels and long skirts instead of cute Macy's outfits. I liked black nail polish, and I had social anxiety. I had one friend, and I went to her house as often as I could. But other than that, I was alone a lot. It was so lonely. I would sit in class and daydream, watch interactions, make up stories in my head about these amazing friendships and romances and other things that felt normal that I felt so separated from. And that loneliness made me an easy prey. There were small interactions with different people at first. A friend's brother who I was uninterested and had said some terrible things to kissed me once, and I was terrified. A guy at school I was very uninterested in asked me to make out with him in the stairway. I said no, and the next day had an anonymous letter in my locker that I should be careful who I piss off and alluding to rapey type scenarios. Gross.
Oh my God.
It felt like, as a person, I held no value and that my body only held one specific value. I hated myself. I had started cutting in 6th grade, and in 10th, it got worse. I had started puking when I was 12, and by 10th grade, I was about 20 pounds underweight, but it wasn't enough. I was still awkward and too tall. I didn't know how to do my hair. I didn't understand makeup. I couldn't fit in with the girls, and guys didn't like me, just my body. No one wanted to talk to me. No one wanted to know me. No one saw me. I was so alone and so isolated and sad and confused.
It's the perfect setup to be taken advantage of. Feeling so, well, like she said, alone.
Well, yeah, and feeling so out of place even with your family, that's going to roll over into school. Like, you're going to feel the outcast there too. And just feeling like she only had that one friend, and obviously she couldn't be with that one friend all the time. It's going to cause some really hard situations for her.
Yeah, so that's so frustrating to me. Back to the thing about, like, within her community and her peer group, being labeled as an outcast, just such a huge contributing factor, because that's supposed to be her, where she feels at home and where she should be able to open up and feel comfortable talking about these things that are bothering her. But instead, there's this fear that's built up because you're already labeled, you're already an outcast, and you're afraid if you speak up about these things that are causing your issues, it'll make it even worse. You'll be even more labeled.
Tia goes on to say, that's how it started. That's the pressure that led up to the oncoming storm. I was 16, my first semester of 11th grade, and I was placed in the first class I loved. I loved it so much. Deep discussions on literature and philosophy. Papers returned with actual feedback and insight, questions, suggestions. He actually read what I wrote and understood it and took time with it. I found my perspective interesting and had dialogue in it. Class itself was the first time in my entire life I felt good enough for more than something superficial. We had inside jokes between me, him, and a few other kids actually doing the assignments. I felt safe, like maybe there are people out there in this world who will like me. Maybe I won't always feel this ache. I felt chosen. I was so good at this, I was being asked to assist ninth graders and ESL students with their work. It was so innocent, the little things. Bringing me an Arizona iced tea because he knew it was my favorite. He brought me a book because he wanted my thoughts on it. That became packing food for me because he noticed I wasn't eating. No one else had caught that, or if they did, no one else cared. I was living off of one grapefruit and caffeine pills every day at that point, puking anything else I was forced to eat to keep up appearances. I also had my license finally, and because of this, was getting invited to more congregation events with kids my own age on weekends. And I went. He actually encouraged me to branch out and to make friends and get as many experiences as I could. But going made me miserable. I watched the guys I had known since childhood fawn over my friends and treat me like their weird, depressed sister. I had girlfriends who treated me like awful mostly, but in the subtext girl way. They needed me to drive, so they were never outright mean, but little things girls do to bully each other. I felt like I was more of a chauffeur than a friend. It was a constant joke that I liked weird music, that I was so tall, I couldn't wear cute shoes, or boys didn't like me, just things like that. There was one guy who liked me. For 3 weeks, I held his hand. I had my first real kiss. It was all very soft and sweet, and then it was over. I think to this day I look back on that as the last innocent interaction of my life. The time before I understood. It was winter when we broke up, right before school was off for Thanksgiving break. I stayed after school that day, just kind of sitting on the steps outside the door before walking home. The teacher I adored so much saw me and asked me what was wrong. I sobbed and I told him everything, all my ridiculous 16-year-old woes. He offered to drive me home so I wouldn't have to walk the 6 blocks home in the cold while crying. He got me a vanilla milkshake at McDonald's. He told me it would all get better and it would be okay, and gave me an awkward car hug, and then I went inside. After break, things were normal again. Back to routine at school and on the weekends with my friends. The semester ended without incident, and he told me he knew my family didn't celebrate holidays, so consider this an end of the semester thank you for helping so much with the ESL students. It was another book. He stood too close when he handed it to me. He touched my fingers. I remember him looking at me so serious and telling me I had so much to give to this world. Don't give up. Don't let the disappointment I feel in others change who I am because they don't understand me. Eventually, I will graduate and move on and find people who appreciate me and that he appreciates me. Now, this hug was less awkward. There was no center console keeping things innocent. It felt protective, tight. His hand was on the back of my head, stroking my hair, and I felt him kiss my head. For some stupid reason that defied everything inside of me, knowing the difference between right and wrong, I stood there in his arms, in the yearbook room in the back hallway of the second floor expansion, and I looked up. Almost in tears and starved for attention, desperate to feel good enough to feel wanted by someone who saw me as a whole, I looked up and let him kiss me. I panicked midway through, and I think he knew it because he backed off, but still held my hand. I can't remember the exact words. Apologies. I know it's wrong, but I see so much in you and blah, blah, blah. All the dumb stuff you crave so badly at 16 when you've spent your entire life feeling crushed by loneliness, trapped inside that basement window, staring out, wondering why no one would just bend down and ask if I was okay. I cried and begged him not to be upset. I took the blame. I remember telling him, I am such a mess and I messed this up, and please let me keep helping the rest of the year. I promise not to be weird or to say anything. Mentally, I was screaming, please don't abandon me too. Please don't judge me as bad or unworthy or too dramatic. He was so kind about it. We all make mistakes, and he is the adult. He should have pushed me back, but he just got lost in it too. He felt this pull too, and it would be okay. We came back from break and moved on from this without any awkwardness. He gave me his number and said I could leave a message over break if I needed to talk. And if not, he hoped I'd enjoy the book.
A lot of this stuff kind of hit you personally.
Yeah, she's a good writer. I like the way she's making the dialogue and stuff. Just the whole, her feeling like she needed to take the blame all of a sudden.
Yeah, that stood out to me too, how she took the responsibility and was like, I hope he doesn't see me different now, even though he was the adult and he made the move.
Right.
But like the stuff he was saying about I just see so much in you, you're different from the other girls your age. All that BS that they use.
Right. No, it's very true. It's all very flattering when you're a young teen and you feel like nobody else understands you. It's exactly what you want to hear, and it's going to work.
Yeah.
Tia goes on to say, by the third day of break, I called. The day before, we had spent at my grandma's with all my family that lived in the area. I had friends come too and had spent the whole day in a house filled with family and friends and felt completely invisible. He asked if I wanted to meet near the school to talk. I lied to my parents that I was going to a movie with friends. I got in his car, and I can't remember to this day what it was, a Taurus maybe, but the bigger ones made in the late 90s. It was red. We parked on the block behind my school, and I told him everything. I cried. He comforted me. We kissed some more. I don't remember how it all happened. I remember his hands undoing the button on my jeans. I remember at some point we were in the back seat. Now that's how I lost my virginity, in the back seat of a red car parked behind my school with my teacher, who was 19 years older than me. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to read.
It's a lot of grooming, because there was such a long period of time where he was doing these little favors, little things to like make a good reputation for himself with her.
Right. He was making her comfortable, making her believe that he was such a safe place.
Yeah, exactly. He had become, like, it was obvious to him he was the only person she could go to when she was down and upset. And
I think giving a 16-year-old or younger your number when you're obviously older, 19 years older to be exact, you know that it's only going to take a matter of days for them to call you. And in doing that, you're almost giving them this sense of responsibility that, oh, but you're the one who picked up the phone, even though you're the one who gave him the number.
Well, yeah, and as the adult, it's your responsibility. Like you said before, this will work because you're taking advantage of a young girl's craving for validation and attention. I mean, that's why the responsibility falls on the adult to have self-control and to not prey on a kid like this, because it's easy prey and it's not something they're ready for yet. It's not something they can emotionally handle when it all, sinks in. Comes out, this is a dysfunctional relationship and you've been taken advantage of.
And how sick is it that they were behind the school? Like, just the school representing innocence, teaching, learning. And that's where he brought her.
I've never thought of school like that, but when I was in it.
Well, that's what it should be.
Yeah. Uh, it's just frustrating, especially as an educator. Like, those should be the most responsible people.
Reminds me of a teacher almost.
Oh, yeah.
The way it's unfolding a bit.
Yeah, just taking advantage of those situations. It's terrifying. Because, like, any bad situation like this, you have the ability to make a decision in the moment.
Right. I know, like, some people, I still don't understand why, but will say that, well, he's only human and he got caught up in it too. But there is no excuse. In my eyes, you are an adult and you know right and wrong. That's why you can legally have sex. You can legally, or not legally have sex, but you are over the age of consent and you need to respect why there is an age of consent in the first place. Why it's not okay to prey on children. There's obvious rules.
There's a power imbalance here. It's like any other form of abuse. This is her teacher. She doesn't have the power to say no as much as he does.
Right. It's almost like saying it's okay for him to keep beating his girlfriend because she stays with him. Like, it doesn't make, there's a power imbalance. There's mental abuse going on. There's physical, like, it just doesn't make sense. I'm going to go back to the story. Tia goes on to say, he didn't hold me after. He was kind of a nervous wreck. He kept asking if I was okay. He panicked, driving me back to my car and asked if I was on the pill. Obviously, I was not.
Just trying to protect himself now.
I was 16 and a decidedly abstinence-only household. We talked briefly about how soon to call him if anything felt off. I remember him saying we had to be more careful next time.
Implying that there is a next time. Like,
Or
even
that,
though he knows he just really screwed up.
yeah,
What were you going to say?
that he implied there's a we, as if she has.
Like, now they're together.
Yeah.
Again, like you mentioned, it's like a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, it was that show that was on Hulu.
Hulu, yeah. It was very controversial. It was a very interesting show.
A teacher was?
Yeah.
Why?
That's what the radio said.
Compared to Cuties, I don't think it was that controversial. But I don't know.
I think back now and like, how was I so stupid that I could think that all I could think was, thank God he's not mad at me for pushing him past what he could control. He still wants to see me and talk to me and be my friend. Ugh, the things we tell ourselves when we're teenagers. But we weren't friends after that. The only conversation after that was how I needed to stay quiet about it and how to make sure I wasn't pregnant.
It's so sad. Ugh. And I don't want to just gloss over that, what you just read, but the fact that he's in self-defense mode right now. He's trying to just play damage control while she's taking personal responsibility and blaming herself.
That's textbook. I can totally relate to that.
What was the last thing you just read? About, every conversation they had after that was about
Right.
not telling anyone, protecting him. Again, That's something that you heard a lot, isn't it?
Well, yeah. And you guys will, if those of you who have listened to my episode will remember, but as I tackled for my iPod Touch that was hidden in my mom's drawer after she had forbidden me to use it anymore, I went to text him, like ask him if he was okay and if I loved him. I'm so sorry. And all he could say was, make sure you tell the cops we've only met up once. Or something to that effect. So it's just, yeah, it goes from them being your safe zone to them making sure you're going to be quiet.
The fact that he knew there would be cops involved just shows he knew how wrong it was. Like, there's no excuse at that point.
She says, I never told my parents or went to anyone for help. He used to drive by the house and I'd panic. I ended up getting married when I was 19 to someone from church just to be able to move somewhere he couldn't find me because I didn't know how to stop it. I was terrified to tell him no. My parents would think I was bad. I would be shunned by my entire church community and be lectured on how men have needs and not to tempt the devil, and how I was not going to survive Armageddon. I was so afraid he would get mad if I ended it and he would tell on me. I had a double take because I was for sure that he was afraid she'd tell on him, but she was afraid he would tell on her.
That's the tough part because, her church is trying to uphold principles that are good for her in the long run, like principles that would have made this situation not what it was if both parties were applying them. But it also leaves up this huge issue where if people, make you feel like you're going to be shamed and judged if you talk about these things, then it's so hard to come forward about them and actually get them resolved because you know you'll be even more shunned by your peers. Your peers' parents won't want you hanging out with your friends. And even if you're not an adult yet, you'll have to face consequences. It's a really tough situation because, yeah, those are good principles not to do these things, but the fear of getting in trouble, being cut off from your family and your friends, it really discourages honesty and being comfortable coming forward if something like this happens to you. Because I think it's so important for kids to know it's okay to come out. You won't be judged. You weren't responsible for this. An adult took advantage of you, and just know you can come to us, you can open up, and we're not going to make you feel ashamed of it. We're going to deal with it and take care of you. And so many hardships could be avoided because then things would be handled correctly from the beginning instead of being swept under the rug and coming out in your late 20s as some kind of trauma that's eating your life. I'm sorry for the rant, but I'm just really passionate about this particular thing.
No, I think that's all true. Now, looking back, I know he wouldn't have. She's talking about telling on her. It amuses me that my child brain even thought that that was an option for him. And I also know now my parents would have been there for me. They would have done everything possible to get me help and to put him in jail. I know now that what happened was not my fault, and it did not make me unlovable by God or humans. I did look him up 6 years ago. He died in a car accident in 2011. I hate myself on a regular basis, wondering if he did this to someone else after me. I get annoyed that I get jealous. That part of me thinks, no, I was special, etc. And then think, if I had said something, maybe I could have saved the next girl. It took me another 15 years to get help. I stayed married, and it wasn't a great situation. On our 1-month wedding anniversary, I was upset he didn't get me flowers or take me to dinner or even acknowledge it. He got angry and threw his wedding ring so hard against the wall the ring cracked. About a month after that was the first time he put a hole in the wall. While he never physically struck me, he did hurt me, and he scared me. He would pull drawers out in the kitchen and throw them. He would give me the silent treatment often and ignore me while I cried. It got a little better after our son was born for a bit, but then it deteriorated to the point where he was choking me on the couch one night because I had been crying and begging for attention. I fully acknowledge my methods of coping back then were not great. I was needy and full of fear of abandonment. I cried all the time and would push and pull and scream, begging for attention. But I also always apologized, and eventually I decided I needed help. I started therapy. In time, I went back to school, and eventually I left. I tried so hard to make that relationship work, but I finally had to accept that I couldn't force someone else to get help if they didn't see anything wrong with their own behavior.
I'm so sorry. Like you mentioned, you were in an unhealthy place. You hadn't dealt with a lot of this trauma, and it was probably difficult for him. But to overreact so harshly, I don't think there's ever an excuse to hurt another person like that, no matter how much they annoy you.
I like how she said it. You can't force someone else to get help if they don't see anything wrong with their behavior. How true is that? She said it really well. You can't. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it seems like that's human nature. We all have blind spots. We all have things that we do, mistakes we make regularly, bad habits we have that we don't even see the problem with. Thankfully, like, if you are open to criticism, and I mean, it's a quality we all would be better off with, if being able to accept criticism and work on our flaws, because nobody's perfect. We all have things we struggle with. Not giving up on yourself just because you've made mistakes and working to be better is the key.
Well, Tia goes on to say, I am happier now, and I have my son. I'm succeeding in school. I have friends who love me and care about me. I have a better relationship with my family, and I have hope that the rest of my life is within my control.
Nice.
So I'm very happy that she feels this optimistic and that she's having some good situations happening her way.
Well, it seems like a decent amount of time has passed, because she said how many years? 14 years or 16 years until she was able to talk about.
15 years to get help.
So she must be pretty close to my age then.
Probably. I think she's a little older than you.
Wow. So yeah, these things, I mean, for a lot of people, if they weren't dealt with immediately, they take until you're old enough to like put the pieces together and realize and identify the issues that's causing you in your life.
Right. Yeah, Tia, I'm really glad that you have a better relationship with your family, and that even though it took a long time, you were able to see that they would have been there for you and they would have done anything possible. But it's such a shame because, well, there I just say it, shame is such a negative emotional enforcer. I'm not saying that correctly at all,
Well,
but
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like,
negatively, it's going to push you to put on a fake personality and to make your family and those around you see what they want to see while hiding and digging, throwing your burdens, in a grave.
and it depends on the context, because I mean, in certain situations, like if this teacher would have been ashamed or had shame about what he, kissing a 16-year-old in the first place, that's healthy shame. I mean, shame is a good thing in the right context, but the fear of shame from other people is a huge deterrent
Right.
in solving these problems.
Yeah. I guess, like, I grew up in a religious household. I still to this day have my own faith, but there is a really huge void in the morals that we grow up with and trying to do the right thing, and then feeling that pressure to do it. And if you do something wrong, you don't feel the safe place, the safeness of your family, those around you. You don't feel like you have their
Support.
yeah, you don't have their support, and you're not going to be able to be honest with them. So there has to be some type of bridge between the both sides where you can keep your morals and keep your beliefs, but also have to have that trust.
I guess the important thing is just like the people we go to for help with these situations, like making us feel comfortable to approach them, knowing, especially with minors, knowing that they can approach the people they go to for help without being shamed or judged for it is a really important thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, every situation is different. I'm just sorry you had to go through all this.
Yeah, this was a lot. This was a tough one to read. The first time I read it, I did cry and like had a really off day.
Yeah, me too.
So, Tia, thank you for sharing your story because it's powerful and we both related to it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, Tia.
I'm really glad that you're doing better and that you're making strides in the right direction. And also that you got help, even though it was such a long time afterwards, because that couldn't have been easy after hiding it away for so long, having the courage to realize, no, I need some help here.
Yeah. Because it can be so corrosive in your life. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but just we've seen people that have had stuff like this happen to them as kids and it got swept under the rug because of this exact situation. The people they went to for help didn't handle it in the right way. They didn't get therapy. They said, well, you're just as responsible as him. It was never dealt with properly, and later in life it boiled up and ruined their adulthood. So it is so important. And I'm glad that even though it bubbled up in your adulthood, you were able to get it dealt with and it didn't destroy your life in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Tia. We really appreciate your story. I think the theme here is don't let the stigma of shame let you be honest. And for parents,
prevent you from being honest.
Prevent you from being honest, and for parents to make sure that you keep an open communication, keep the doorways open.
Yeah.
Don't let it get clogged up because you might be missing out on a really big piece of your kid's life.
Yeah. You have any final thoughts, Rosie?
Mm-mm.
All right. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.